All right, look, the iPhone 14 Pro Max is closing in on 1 year old. We kind of already know this with the 15 Pro Max coming soon. Now, all year, I've basically been giving this phone its props, talking about how it's been pretty good and pretty great, calling it the King of Kings, giving you a lot of reviews in comparisons to other devices, showing its prowess and its performance and stuff like that with the A16, talking about how good the cameras are, how pro they are, and all that stuff. But today I want to give you some of my honest issues that I've encountered with the iPhone 14 Pro Max throughout the year. Now you can see right there, I still have my SIM in here, my eSIM in here, but let's be real, no phone is perfect, and I want to be balanced here and tell you some of the honest issues I've had as a user of this phone. So the first one, and they're going to be subjective, and again, this is not to bash the phone, this is just to give you a more balanced perspective. Now, the first one is going to be related to the weight of this device. Now, I've talked about this before, how I think the iPhone 15 Pro Max is going to lower the weight with a titanium build. Hopefully that comes true. But you'll see as I place this on here, my scale is reading 242 grams. Now, if I go ahead and place my case on the phone, which is how I rock this phone majority of the time. Now, this one is not the lightest case out there. I do have a, kickstand on here, so that's going to add a little bit to the weight on here, but I'm using a phone around 293 grams. Now, if this phone was about 30 grams lighter, like an iPhone 14 Plus, even with a kickstand case, it would be much lighter than, the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Now, I have a Nothing Phone 2 here, and this phone is around the same size as an iPhone 14 Pro Max, but take a look at the weight of this phone right here. 205 grams, so it's well over 30 grams lighter, and with a case on it, you'll see right here, Nothing Phone 2, still lighter than the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Now that is using aluminum. You can't really compare aluminum to stainless steel like on the iPhone 14 Pro Max, but at the end of the day, I just think the weight of this phone, it would be nice if this weight could come down on the next model. Now, the next issue I had as a user of this device is the screen brightness. Not how amazing it is, because I'm going to praise it here once again. This is the brightest phone I've seen all year. I've talked about how before I have to go into accessibility to reduce the screen brightness. That's how bright it is. But I have this thing where if I'm outdoors for maybe more than like 5 to 10 minutes with the crank to the max brightness, it actually dims. It gets too warm and then the phone just dims it. So it kind of negates the fact that it's super bright. Now, if you're a worker who works outdoors or you're outdoors a lot, you do a lot of outdoorsy things and you need that brightness cranked up. Maybe you live in an environment where you get a lot of sun and you really need that thing cranked up. Sometimes you're going to find yourself seeing this phone dimmed. And it really ruins the experience because you got to wait like a few minutes for the phone to cool down. And sometimes I had to reboot it just to get the brightness to go crank back up into the auto brightness on a warm summer day. So that's been an issue that I really don't enjoy about this phone, because some other phones don't really do that. They just kind of let you keep them bright and then kind of drain the battery. Although I did find the S23 Ultra does this as well. So I kind of don't like that, but there are phones I've tried that don't really do that. So the next issue I had with this phone in my first year was multiple app crashes early on. And I mean multiple, like a lot of apps were just crashing on this phone, more so than I found on the previous version of the iPhone. So really do think that the iPhone 13 Pro Max was a little bit more refined, a little bit better than the iPhone 14 Pro Max when it comes to performance and bugs and stuff like that. This phone just really had quite a few of those app crashes. So that's an honest issue I did have with this phone. I will say though that it finally got better over time, and now I don't really see any app crashes anymore on this phone, and it's pretty much how I expected it to perform on day one. So I'm very happy with the phone right now. I think they've worked out most of the kinks, but initially it's just weird that we had so many just little bugs and crashes on iOS 16 that I experienced. So that's just a little thing with the iPhone 14 Pro Max. It didn't really make or break the experience. It just was like, come on, like the 13 Pro Max was just so much more polished than this at first. But the next issue was always on display. First of all, it was too bright initially. They had these wallpapers, and they added this thing where you could like get rid of the wallpaper and it looks dimmer. However, I didn't really use this, even though this is one of the main features. And the reason why is because it drained more battery on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. So I'm a stickler for battery life. I want great battery life all the time. I've made a video how to keep your battery at 100% as long as possible. It's not possible to keep it there forever, but for an extended period. But this phone right here with the always on display, a great feature, but it just drained its battery too much. And I don't know why. I mean, well, I kind of know why. The screen's on, but at the same time, some other phones drained it less with their always ons enabled. So it just drained it a little bit too much on a phone that already doesn't have amazing battery life. So that moves me on to the battery life. Now, this has been an honest issue as well with specific thing attached to it. There's something attached to this. You can see I'm at 40% right now. I didn't charge last night. Here's what I'm talking about. This phone specifically, when you crank the brightness up, it really drains quite fast. Like unbelievably fast compared to, what you would expect an iPhone to drain like. So they have that 2000 nits, but it really does tax the battery life on this phone if you keep it there for extended periods. Again, it'll dim automatically if it gets too warm in sunlight, but I do find that if you keep this cranked up, it will drain probably middle of the day to maybe 7-8 o'clock at night versus you could have a 13 Pro Max going into the second day. However, here's the caveat. I do find that if we do bring it below half or below, you can easily go into 2 days with this phone. And if you keep it around 75, like around there, it stays pretty solid for most of the day. So I don't find this phone to have horrible battery life. I think it's pretty darn good, especially in standby time. But when it comes to heavy use, high brightness, this phone definitely drained more than the 13 Pro Max, and that's just the facts. So I do expect Apple to really up the battery life on the next version, as I talked about my 15 Pro Max video. But this is just an honest issue I had, is I wasn't able to take full advantage of the brightness because it drained so much battery life. However, I still used it, but it was occasionally because I didn't want the battery life to drain so much. And the next one is the charging was just so slow compared to other, model phones out there. Samsung phones charge faster. The OnePlus devices charge way faster. Xiaomi phones charge way faster. The Pixel Fold doesn't charge faster, but there's a lot of phones out there that just charge so much faster than the iPhone. So I just want to see Apple throw some faster charging on this phone. It just will add to the value proposition of picking up the latest and greatest iPhone. Next issue I had with the iPhone 14 Pro Max is the telephoto distance. It's just not long enough to me, 15 times. And then when you do go up past 3, you have this digital zoom, so it doesn't look quite as good, especially when I zoom in. I get a lot more noise than I would like in my photo. And so for this price, with Samsung having a 10 times optical zoom, I want more optical zoom on a phone that's costing me, $1,200-$1,300. So I'm really fingers crossed for this periscope lens on the next version, especially at this money. And also I wanted to mention that the telephoto lens on here definitely is not that great in low light. So if you do push this, night mode stuff, or you take a lot of photos at night with the zoom lens, it's not the best compared to just its main lens on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. And the last issue I had with this phone, but this goes for all the 14s, was the eSIM. Not for the sense of it doesn't work. It did work. But I actually was at the T-Mobile, that's what I'm using right now, but I was there and I seen people in there waiting like a few minutes, and they were trying to explain to the customers how the eSIM works because they were confused as well. They were getting a new iPhone. It just created some hassle. And while, I don't think they're going to go away from this, it actually literally got another SIM with a separate service just so I don't have to keep switching from eSIM to my phones that use SIM card slots. So, this is a change that you're probably going to have to embrace if you want to keep using iPhone. But at the same time, eSIM only worked well when I switched between iPhones. You have this feature where you can easily just tap the side button, Face ID, easily send your eSIM over to the next iPhone. But it wasn't easy when switching to Android. Didn't like that. at all. And that was an issue for me. And so that's it. Those are the issues I encountered over 1 year using my 14 Pro Max. I paid full retail for this phone, and that's everything that I didn't like about it. Now, I have plenty of videos where I praise this phone, and I don't think it's a bad phone. And all those issues might seem minor to you, but those were the things that stood out to me as not the greatest about this. So this wasn't a perfect iPhone. We are, I think, at people say peak iPhone, but there's always going to be improvements that can be made on anything. That's just the nature of technology. So if you guys enjoyed this video, thumbs up down below, and then also comment your experience if you have a 14 Pro or Pro Max. If you don't, you have a 13 Pro or Pro Max, let me know if you plan on skipping this one, going to a 15, or you plan on getting a 15 Pro or Pro Max. I'll catch you all in the next episode. Thank you very much for watching. Nick here. Be sure to be well, and peace.